He was there every day. He never missed a show, he never got tired. Sometimes he seemed like just a shadow among the many hurried faces that passed through the station. His fur, now gray and stained by time, was the only visible feature amidst the frenetic movement of people. An old dog, sitting still, looking towards the horizon as if waiting for something or someone. What others didn't know, what few could understand, was that the dog wasn't there just because fate had put him in that place. He was not just a lost animal as it might seem at first glance. He was waiting. He waited with a silent and almost superhuman devotion which began to drag on through the days and extended through the seasons that passed. 10 years of waiting. 10 years of waiting without promises, no guarantees. But there was something even deeper behind this story. Something the dog knew that no one else knew. Something that would make his wait not just a story about loyalty, but about transformation. Because the dog wasn't expecting what everyone thought he was expecting. And this wasn't going to be a story about goodbyes or reunions. It was about the quiet power of something being lost, so that something new can be born. Laura, a middle-aged woman, was sitting at a table in a simple cafe near the station. Mornings had become routine for her. A cycle of days without any major surprises where time seemed to slip through her fingers. She looked out the window with the empty eyes of someone who has seen too much without really having lived. Her gaze was distant, lost in an invisible point beyond the busy streets and the muffled conversations around her. She had lost so much, but what hurt the most was the silence. The loneliness that the world had imposed on her after an irreparable loss. Her husband, Thomas, had died suddenly and unexpectedly 5 years ago. Since then, her life had seemed nothing more than a sequence of days that intertwined into a gray routine, like an endless rainy morning. There was no laughter. There was no warmth. She felt his absence like a constant shadow, hovering in every corner of the house that now seemed too big for her. The pain did not ease, but it became a familiar companion. Sometimes she felt that the silence of her life was not only empty but weighed on her like a thick cloud, robbing her of even the ability to dream. She tried to distract herself, trying to find small moments of pleasure in the simplest things. An old book, a cup of hot tea, the daily commute to work. But nothing seemed to fill the space left by Thomas's absence. Laura didn't like to think about what might come next. She was afraid of the idea of starting over, of trying to open her heart again. Love seemed far away, almost unattainable. And the idea of a new beginning, of an emotional transformation, was territory she preferred to avoid. But then a small gesture began to change her life, and that gesture came from an unexpected place. A place she passed every day but had never looked closely at. A silent presence at the station gate, waiting in a way she never expected. The dog. She first noticed him one cold morning when the station was particularly busy. People were rushing to catch their trains, but something there in that corner caught her attention. At first, she thought he was just another stray, someone abandoned by life's circumstances. But there was something special about this dog, something that couldn't be ignored. He was there every day. Sometimes he would look at people. Other times he would just stand there, lost in his own thoughts or whatever, as if the world around him was just a screen in the background. She never saw him ask for anything, never saw him actually interact with people. He was a silent spectator of the lives of the people around him, waiting, taking his time. At first, Laura didn't think much about it, but soon the days began to drag on and she began to see him more often. Maybe the dog was just waiting for food, maybe he was just a homeless animal lost like so many others. But something in his gaze made her feel a strange connection, as if the dog knew something she hadn't yet understood. He was there, and she was here, both in a kind of waiting. The days passed, and somehow the dog's presence became more noticeable to Laura. It was as if he had been a silent reflection of her own life, a life full of waiting but without clear direction. He seemed to be stuck in something from the past, or perhaps adrift like her. But in some subtle way, he was always there, a reminder that perhaps there was something more beyond the pain and loneliness. On a particularly difficult day, when the memories of Thomas felt heavier than ever, Laura found herself walking through the station once again. She no longer felt as connected to the others around her. Her interactions felt shallow and empty. Her heart still held the deep sadness that day after day made her want to hide from the world. It was then, as he approached the place where the dog used to be, that something changed. He wasn't in the usual corner where she always saw him sitting, staring at the horizon. This morning he had approached slowly with quiet dignity and sat down right in front of Laura. She stopped, surprised by his attitude. The dog's gaze wasn't searching, nor was it pleading. He seemed somehow more present than she had ever imagined. His eyes shone with a softness that touched something deep inside her. Laura crouched down automatically without thinking much and held out her hand. The dog looked at her as if he had been waiting for this gesture. With calm confidence, he approached and rested his head on the palm of her hand. And in that instant, something broke inside her. It was as if that simple gesture of connection, something so pure and wordless, was offering something she didn't know she needed. It was more than comfort. It was a silent response to the pain she carried. The dog didn't speak, but he understood her loneliness, her pain, her longing. He knew exactly what she was feeling without having to say a single word. Laura felt a lightness in her hands as she petted the dog, a sense of relief she hadn't experienced in years. There was no longer any distance between her and the world around her. Something was breaking down inside her heart, and the presence of that animal seemed to have a magical healing power. She smiled for the first time in a long time, as if her own pain had momentarily dissipated. The dog didn't abandon her after that day. Instead, he became a constant presence in her life, as were Thomas's memories. He seemed to understand that Laura was finally beginning to open up a part of herself that had been closed off for so long. He was there for her in a silent but unquestioning way. Over time, Laura began to realize that her relationship with the dog was not just about the temporary relief of a caress or a friendly presence. It was about a subtle but profound transformation that was happening inside her. That dog, with his silence and calm, was teaching her a lesson she had never imagined possible. That life, despite all its losses, still had something to offer. Something new, something unexpected. And as the dog waited, she began to wait too, but now in a different way. Not an empty wait, but a wait filled with possibilities, with healing, and with new beginnings. He wasn't just there to keep her company, he was there to help her find herself again. The bond between Laura and the dog, which had once seemed like a simple act of solidarity, began to grow in ways she never imagined possible. The dog, now named Sammy, had become more than just a companion. He was helping Laura reconnect with the world, with the little joys she had lost along the way. Mornings, which had previously been nothing more than endless chores, now had a different glow as she walked through the station with Sammy by her side. While the comfort was evident, the changes were not without their challenges. Laura sometimes felt the weight of vulnerability that came with this new connection. There were times when she felt a subtle fear that, like so many things in her life, this relationship could disappear without warning. She knew what it was like to lose something suddenly, and it made her cautious. The relationship between her and Sammy wasn't instantly perfect. There were moments of hesitation both on her part and on the dog's. Sammy, as loving and patient as he was, also had his own invisible scars, signs of a life full of uncertainty. Like him, Laura was also learning to trust again, and the healing process was more complex than she imagined. Sometimes Sammy would pull away as if he too needed his own space to process the reality of his existence. It was a silent reminder that even when things seemed good, the shadows of the past could appear at any moment. Laura began to realize that there was more at stake than she had imagined. The love between them was not just a matter of companionship. It was a ground where both souls could grow and, in a way, heal their own wounds. She looked at Sammy and saw him not just as a dog, but as a representation of what she had lost, but also of what she could still get back. His presence challenged her to open herself up again to love, to trust, to hope. There were days, however, when Laura's emotions became more intense. She realized that by allowing Sammy to get close, she was actually opening herself up to her own suffering. The loneliness she had tried to avoid now manifested itself in a different way. When Sammy came near, she felt warmth, a healing, but also the memory of her pain. As much as she tried to distance herself from that pain, she knew she would have to face it somehow. Laura's inner conflict was subtle but palpable. She wanted to move on. She wanted to believe that life could be full again. But the shadow of Thomas's loss continued to loom over her, like a distant echo that wouldn't leave her alone. Sammy didn't force her to get over it quickly, but his mere presence made her question what she was really afraid of. Was it the pain of loss? Or was it the fear of yet another disappointment, yet another inevitable goodbye? And then, one morning, the challenge came in an unexpected way. Sammy was lying next to Laura as usual, but something was different. He was restless, as if something was bothering him. Laura watched closely and noticed that he was sniffing something in the air, his tail gently thumping the ground. It was then that she heard in the distance the familiar sound of a siren. She looked at Sammy, who was now completely focused, as if he were waiting for something important to happen. The first rays of morning light began to invade the room, reflecting in the window with a soft glow. The station was silent that day, as if the world was about to pause. Laura felt a growing tension. Something in the air seemed to change. She didn't know what yet, but her instincts told her that something was about to happen. Sammy stood up, looked at her, and then, with an almost urgent speed, ran out the door. Laura followed him instinctively, without hesitation, feeling something tightening in her chest. When she reached the station, what she saw made her stop for a moment. Laura found herself standing on the platform, her heart racing. Sammy was standing in front of her, staring at the train that had just arrived. His eyes were fixed on the carriage door, and Laura felt a strange sense of déjà vu, as if she were watching a scene she had experienced before. Memories of Thomas, the man she had loved and lost, began to wash over her like waves on a rough sea, but there was something different about the way the memories were coming now. The platform was silent, but there was tension in the air. Sammy once again seemed to be waiting for something, or someone. Laura looked around, not knowing what exactly she was looking for. She felt more than ever that something was about to happen. And then, as if in answer to a silent prayer, the train door opened and a figure appeared. At first, Laura thought she was seeing something out of the ordinary, but as her eyes adjusted, she realized that the figure was, in fact, a man. A man she hadn't seen in so long, a man she never expected to find in this place at this time. Thomas. Her heart skipped a beat. What was happening? How was he here after all these years? Thomas looked different, older, more tired, but he still had that sparkle in his eyes that Laura recognized so well. He was standing in the middle of the station looking straight at her, as if fate had brought them together again, as if no time had passed. Laura could hardly believe what she was seeing. She felt paralyzed for a moment, unable to take a step. Time seemed to have stopped. But then something pulled her back to reality. Sammy was standing next to Thomas, his tail wagging slowly, as if the dog himself was bringing this connection, this unlikely reunion to life. Thomas looked at Sammy and, without saying a word, slowly lowered himself to the dog's level. Sammy, with his calm, deep expression, approached Thomas as if he recognized him, as if he had been waiting for him as long as Laura had. The scene was surreal. Laura stood there watching the scene, feeling the heat of her own shallow breath. The pieces were falling into place in her mind. She knew somehow that Sammy had been the link between her and Thomas. The dog that had always been there waiting was now bringing them together in a way that seemed magical. But the feeling that enveloped Laura was not just joy. It was a mix of contradictory emotions. She wanted to run to him, hug him, feel his presence again, but something in her chest told her to wait. The pain of loss was still there, and she didn't know how to reconcile the lost love with the reality of the moment. She felt a mixture of guilt and relief. Relief for having found Thomas, but guilt for all the moments she had spent without him, not knowing if she would forgive him for his departure. As the station filled with sounds and movement, the little scene between Sammy and Thomas continued. Laura knew something important was happening, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. The dog, with his quiet, calm presence, was acting as a catalyst, like the glue that held together all the parts of her life that had been broken for so long. The reunion was not explosive. There were no shouts or dramatic displays. It was a silent reunion, deep and full of unspoken emotions. Laura approached slowly, her steps hesitant, her feelings in turmoil. She crouched down next to Thomas and looked at Sammy, who now stood between them like a magical being, knowing that he had brought back not only the love that had been lost, but also the healing of a wound that seemed eternal. Laura's breathing was even, though her heart was still pounding. When her eyes met Thomas's, all she felt was a quiet peace. A peace that came not from the fact that he was back, but from the understanding that time, despite its scars, still had the power to heal. She was ready to move on, to forgive, to live again. The station, which had once seemed like a place of loss and loneliness, was now transformed into a space of reunions and new possibilities. The dog, who had waited patiently all this time, had now fulfilled his mission. Sammy, with his infinite calm, left behind a legacy of healing, unity, and transformation. The last image Laura had was of the dog, looking at them with his wise eyes, as if he were witnessing the end of a cycle and the beginning of a new chapter. He didn't need anything else. He already knew that his mission was complete. And so, with the same tranquility with which he had arrived, Sammy began to walk away, as if destiny had already fulfilled its part. His story, like theirs, was written, and the future, although uncertain, now seemed brighter. The train pulled away from the station with the soft sound of the tracks, but the echo of that departure seemed much deeper to Laura. The distant song of the train was no longer the sound of a separation, but of a journey completed, of a cycle closed, of a home that was finally being rebuilt. She stood on the platform, the soft wind caressing her face, as she looked at Thomas, who now stood beside her, with Sammy still close to them like a silent guardian. Everything seemed clearer now. Time, with its pain and promises, had brought back what Laura needed most, but she knew that the answers were not only found in new beginnings. They were inside her, in everything she had learned from the pain, from the longing, from the love she still carried, and from the compassion she was now willing to share. The reunion did not mean a return to the past, but rather an opportunity to create something new, to live the present with more intensity, with more truth. "You really came back," she murmured, looking at Thomas as if trying to believe it, as if reality was still adjusting to what she had thought was impossible. But then she saw something in his eyes that she had not seen in a long time. Sincerity. He was no longer the man she had lost. He had changed, as she had changed. They both carried scars, but those scars did not stop them from being whole. They made them human. They were stronger, more whole now, together. "I never left you, Laura," he replied, his voice soft, almost a whisper, as if it were more a thought than a speech. "I just needed time to understand what was happening, what I had truly lost. And now, I know. I know I can do it all over again with you, if you'll just let me." The words floated in the air, and Laura felt enveloped by them as if they were an answer to all the unspoken questions, to all the moments when she felt there was no hope left. And as the two exchanged glances, Sammy walked away, almost as if he knew he had already fulfilled his role. He turned unhurriedly and continued along the path towards the horizon where the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with warm, soft colors. The dog seemed to be leaving, but his mission was accomplished. Laura didn't know what the future held, but she felt a quiet peace, as if the stars forming in the sky were now aligned in a way they had never been before. She felt that life would continue to go on, but with a new perspective. Sammy had not only brought her and Thomas together, but had taught them both that true love is not possessive or dependent. It doesn't demand perfection, but understanding. It doesn't rush, but waits patiently. And in that moment, Laura knew she could forgive, not just Thomas, but herself as well. She could start over with the scars that were hers, with the stories she carried, and with the truth that true transformation comes not from external changes, but from how we choose to see the world around us. Sometimes true healing comes from giving someone, or yourself, the space to grow, to understand, to learn. As Sammy continued on his way, leaving the station behind, Laura took Thomas's hand, feeling a silent connection between them, as if there was finally an understanding that went beyond words. They were no longer living in the past, and the future was still a mystery, but in that moment, with the sound of the wind and the twilight in the background, they knew they would be ready to face whatever came. And perhaps, Laura thought, the greatest gift Sammy had given them was not their reunion, but the teaching that time, no matter how painful, can always heal. That with patience and love and understanding, life can fall back into place in ways we never imagined. And that transformation, no matter how difficult, can come with an unexpected gentleness. Like the sound of a dog walking slowly through a station, bringing with it the promise of a new beginning. If this story touched your heart, just imagine how many more are still to come. Here, every bark carries a new beginning, a second chance, a brand new life. If you believe in the power of dogs to change destinies, like mine, like yours, then subscribe to the channel and leave a like, because together we'll share stories the world needs to hear and feel.